The walls are closing in on Keir Starmer. In a political twist no one saw coming, Labour's once stable empire is now cracking at its foundation. MPs are not just resigning, they're defecting to Reform UK. Panic has set in, whispers of betrayal echo through Westminster's halls, and Starmer himself, normally composed and calculating, has been caught in an emotional breakdown that's sending shockwaves through the party. As the defections grow, pressure mounts, and now Britain faces the unthinkable. A snap general election, forced not by strategy, but by sheer chaos. This is the downfall they never wanted you to see. What seemed like a normal week in British politics has turned into a full-blown crisis for Labour. The tipping point? A series of defections that have not only embarrassed Keir Starmer's leadership, but exposed the deep fractures festering beneath the party's surface. It began quietly, one backbencher issuing a carefully worded resignation, but within hours, the trickle became a flood. One after another, Labour MPs took to social media, then to live interviews, announcing their decision to leave the party and join Reform UK. This wasn't a coincidence, it was a rebellion. Starmer, who has spent last year trying to reshape Labour into a centrist powerhouse, never expected this kind of backlash. His aides reportedly scrambled to control the narrative, but the damage was already done. Every defection became a headline, every headline a dagger to Labour's credibility. And while Labour spokespeople dismissed the events as isolated cases, it became increasingly clear this was a coordinated mutiny. The media was quick to pounce. News anchors described it as a meltdown. Political analysts began speculating. Was this the beginning of the end for Starmer? One reporter, stationed outside Parliament, claimed sources inside Labour HQ described Starmer as visibly shaken, nearly inconsolable, during a closed-door crisis meeting. The Prime Minister-in-waiting had just been dealt the biggest political betrayal of his career, and he didn't see it coming. Behind the scenes, senior Labour officials tried to rally support. Urgent emails, emergency calls and desperate pleas were sent to remaining MPs to hold the line. But the panic was obvious, and panic is contagious. MPs who had remained silent were now rethinking their positions. Constituents were bombarding them with questions, demanding accountability. Why are MPs leaving? What's happening to our party? Is Labour collapsing from within? And at the heart of it all stood Reform UK, the once marginal movement now seizing the moment. Nigel Farage's allies capitalised on Labour's weakness, welcoming the defectors with open arms. Reform UK issued public statements claiming these MPs had finally seen the truth and could no longer support Starmer's weak and failing leadership. They framed the defectors as patriots, heroes who had chosen country over party. This narrative began to take hold. Starmer's image as a steady hand in turbulent times was shattered. His efforts to present Labour as a united, electable force now looked like a carefully constructed illusion. And for the first time since he took over the reins, the public began to question not just his leadership, but his integrity. As pressure mounted, whispers started emerging from within Labour's top ranks. He might have to step down. We need a reset. It's time to rethink everything. The crisis wasn't just about losing MPs, it was about losing control. Starmer's emotional breakdown wasn't just symbolic, it was a reflection of a leader watching his empire collapse in real time. And while he tried to regroup, Reform UK surged in the polls. Suddenly, they weren't just a fringe party. They were a threat, a real one, a force powerful enough to reshape the political landscape and throw Britain into a state of electoral emergency. The countdown had begun, and no one knows how it will end. The political storm unleashed by the Labour defections is not just shaking party foundations, it's redrawing the entire electoral battlefield. In the hours following the initial announcement, the political establishment was plunged into panic mode. Keir Starmer, once considered the steady hand steering Labour toward an election victory, found himself isolated, unable to control the growing mutiny from within. Analysts quickly noticed that these weren't minor resignations. The MPs abandoning Labour weren't backbenchers or fringe dissenters. They were key players, figures who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Starmer, defending his leadership and echoing the party's message. Their sudden exit to Reform UK sent an unmistakable signal. The confidence in Starmer's leadership had collapsed from within. Parliament was instantly thrown into chaos. Inside Westminster, murmurs turned into loud debates. Opposition leaders seized the moment, calling Labour's implosion proof that the party was unfit to govern. Reform UK leader Richard Tice took to the airwaves, declaring this the beginning of a great national reckoning. His speeches struck a chord not only with disgruntled Labour voters, but with swaths of undecided citizens fed up with political games. One by one, former Labour MPs stepping into the reform fold began speaking out, exposing deep fractures in Labour's internal machinery. Some accused Starmer of stifling debate, ignoring grassroots members, and turning a blind eye to community concerns, particularly around crime, immigration, and national identity. The media frenzy intensified when one of the defectors revealed they had been in secret talks with Reform UK for over 6 months. This wasn't a sudden move. It had been building under Starmer's nose for months, and he either didn't notice or chose not to act. Political insiders speculated that other MPs may be quietly considering the same exit, fearing their re-election chances under Labour were now in jeopardy. Pundits began comparing Starmer's current crisis to the disastrous leadership collapses of previous Labour heads, drawing parallels to the internal rebellions that sunk Jeremy Corbyn and Ed Miliband. The ghost of past political failures now loomed large over Starmer's leadership. At Labour HQ, staff worked frantically to manage the narrative, but their efforts felt too little, too late. A scheduled press briefing turned into a disaster when Starmer appeared visibly shaken, avoiding direct questions about who might be next to leave. His usual polished responses gave way to vague platitudes. This wasn't the calm, collected Starmer that voters were used to. It was a man under siege, watching the walls of his political fortress crumble one brick at a time. Party donors began expressing concern privately, with rumours spreading that some major backers were reconsidering their financial support in light of the growing instability. The once confident campaign strategy was now being rewritten daily, as Labour tried desperately to maintain control of a narrative that had slipped far beyond its grasp. Meanwhile, public opinion began shifting rapidly. Polling data revealed a startling trend. Reform UK's approval ratings were skyrocketing, particularly in traditional Labour strongholds. Constituencies that had remained loyal to Labour for decades were now swinging hard toward reform, drawn by promises of political transparency, direct accountability, and a tougher stance on issues many voters felt Labour had ignored. Social media lit up with hashtags calling for change and demanding Starmer's resignation. Videos of reform rallies went viral, showing packed venues, passionate speeches, and a surging sense of national awakening. The timing of the defections was especially damning. With an election already expected within the year, Labour now faced the daunting task of rebuilding trust and cohesion in record time. But the clock was ticking, and with every passing day, Reform UK gained momentum. Insiders from within both parties confirmed that informal talks about calling an early general election had begun to take shape. Some Conservative MPs, hoping to capitalise on Labour's chaos, privately hinted at supporting a snap election motion. The possibility of a national vote, triggered not by careful planning but by sheer political collapse, was now very real. Starmer's personal image also took a major hit. Once hailed as the competent, no-nonsense leader who could restore Labour's electability, he was now painted as disconnected and weak. His inability to prevent the defections, respond swiftly, or rally his party only amplified concerns that he lacked the resilience required for national leadership. Leaks from Labour's inner circle suggested Starmer had become increasingly isolated, relying on a shrinking circle of advisers and cutting off dissenting voices rather than addressing concerns. The irony was painful. In attempting to project strength, he had ignored the very fractures that would cause his foundation to collapse. As the drama unfolded, Reform UK embraced the role of political disruptor. No longer dismissed as a fringe party, they were now viewed as a viable third force, capable of reshaping British politics. They moved swiftly to introduce bold policy proposals, challenging both Labour and the Conservatives to respond. Their messaging resonated with a frustrated public who felt unheard by the political elite. In a climate of uncertainty and distrust, Reform's direct, unapologetic style was winning hearts, and more importantly, votes. By the end of the week, Starmer was no longer just facing defections. He was staring down the barrel of a political revolt. With whispers of more MPs preparing to jump ship, Labour's campaign infrastructure on the brink of implosion, and public confidence waning by the hour, one thing was becoming crystal clear. The British political landscape was undergoing a seismic transformation, and Starmer's grip on power had never looked more fragile. The stage was now set for either a miraculous comeback or total political annihilation, and the forces at play were not waiting for permission to act. As the dust from the initial shock began to settle, it became evident that this was no ordinary political blunder. This was a full-scale unravelling of the Labour Party's electoral strategy, and Keir Starmer was caught in the centre of the storm. Panic was no longer confined to Labour's headquarters. It was rippling across local constituencies, where grassroots organisers were left confused and demoralised. Loyal volunteers, many of whom had campaigned tirelessly for years, found themselves questioning their allegiance as they watched high-profile MPs abandon the party and join Reform UK in an unprecedented political migration. The ideological glue that had long held Labour together was dissolving in real time, replaced by uncertainty, suspicion, and a growing belief that the party had lost its soul. What made this moment especially devastating for Starmer was the timing. Labour had spent the better part of the last 2 years attempting to portray itself as a government in waiting, a competent, modern alternative to the chaos of Conservative rule. Starmer himself was carefully positioned as a pragmatic reformer, someone who could rebuild trust after the internal disarray left by Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. But now, all of that groundwork was crumbling. The defection of MPs to Reform UK was not just a betrayal of party loyalty. It was a loud, unmistakable declaration that Labour had failed to represent the voices it claimed to champion. These weren't defections based on personal grudges. They were rooted in fundamental disagreements about the party's priorities, values, and willingness to confront difficult national issues. Among the most controversial topics now dominating the headlines were crime, immigration, and grooming. Gangs, issues that had long been treated as political landmines by Labour leadership. For years, critics accused Labour of avoiding open discussion on these topics, fearing backlash or accusations of insensitivity. But now, those accusations were being hurled by former insiders, MPs who once defended the party's approach but were now openly condemning it as cowardly and disconnected. One former MP described the leadership's silence on grooming gang scandals as morally indefensible, igniting a firestorm that reached far beyond the political class. For everyday citizens, especially in communities directly affected by these crimes, the sense of betrayal was visceral, and Reform UK wasted no time seizing the moment, presenting themselves as the only party willing to speak plainly and act decisively. The fallout wasn't just ideological, it was strategic. Labour's campaign staff, already stretched thin, were thrown into chaos as they scrambled to identify safe seats and triage vulnerable ones. Constituency offices that had once been Labour strongholds were now bracing for a fight as Reform UK candidates surged in local polls. Behind closed doors, Labour MPs began quietly seeking assurances about their future. Some reportedly demanded one-on-one meetings with Starmer, expressing deep concern over the direction of the party and the credibility of its national message. The atmosphere was no longer one of teamwork. It was survival mode, with each politician calculating whether sticking with Starmer was worth the risk to their own careers. Meanwhile, the national media was having a field day. Every news outlet, from traditional broadsheets to fast-moving digital platforms, was dissecting Labour's collapse and speculating on who might be next to jump ship. Front pages were dominated by images of Starmer, with headlines questioning his future. Political commentators who once praised his disciplined messaging were now labelling him as tone-deaf and politically out of touch. Talk shows buzzed with speculation about potential replacements, fueling internal tension as ambitious figures within Labour began quietly positioning themselves for a possible leadership bid. The word coup wasn't being whispered anymore, it was being openly discussed. Adding to the instability was the ever-growing popularity of Reform UK, which now found itself catapulted from the margins into mainstream relevance. Their public rallies drew unprecedented crowds, filled with citizens disillusioned by what they saw as years of political cowardice from the establishment parties. Richard Tice's speeches grew bolder, framing reform as a patriotic movement, reclaiming the values of honesty, courage, and national pride. With each defection, the party gained not just political capital, but also a legitimacy that no amount of advertising or campaign spending could buy. And the more Labour stumbled, the stronger reform looked by comparison. In a particularly damning twist, leaked memos began to surface from within Labour's campaign teams, revealing internal warnings that had gone ignored. One document, dated months before the defections, reportedly warned of deepening disillusionment among MPs and called for urgent action to reconnect with local constituencies. Another memo outlined concerns about Starmer's over-reliance on elite advisers and warned that grassroots feedback was being suppressed. The fact that these warnings were ignored only deepened the public perception that Labour's collapse was self-inflicted, a slow-motion train wreck driven by arrogance and detachment from reality. Public trust continued to erode with each passing day. Poll after poll showed Labour's support slipping, with Reform UK now emerging as the second most popular party in several key regions. Voters who had never considered backing a third party were now openly expressing admiration for Reform's blunt approach. For them, the defections weren't a sign of instability, they were evidence that even insiders believed Labour was beyond repair. That perception was dangerous, because it triggered a feedback loop. The more Labour appeared to be failing, the more voters abandoned it, accelerating its decline. By this point, even the Conservatives, despite their own issues, began to benefit from Labour's disarray. Tory strategists saw an opportunity to frame themselves as the last bastion of political stability, while quietly watching the Labour reform war drain their opponents' resources. Behind closed doors, Conservative officials debated whether to push for a snap election, believing that if they struck while Labour was weak, they could win decisively and wipe out reform before it grew too powerful. The very real threat of an early general election began to loom, driven not by traditional timelines, but by the shifting winds of political chaos. Keir Starmer, once hailed as the man to bring Labour back from the brink, now looked like a leader presiding over its disintegration. His public appearances became less frequent and more scripted. His allies urged caution, but the damage was accelerating. Each silence, each dodged question, each awkward press briefing further chipped away at his authority. The idea of him leading Labour into the next general election no longer felt like a certainty. It felt like a gamble many within his own party were no longer willing to take. As the political fallout from Labour's disintegration intensified, the pressure on Keir Starmer to take decisive action reached a boiling point. With defections continuing to rock the party, Starmer's leadership was under constant scrutiny, and the public's disillusionment grew deeper. It wasn't just the MPs who were abandoning ship. Party members, local officials, and long-time supporters were also voicing their concerns. The social media landscape became a battleground, with former Labour supporters sharing their grievances and frustrations online, accusing Starmer of failing to stand up for core party values. The once strong Labour brand, known for championing social justice and the working class, now appeared fractured and directionless. In an attempt to regain control of the narrative, Starmer made a series of public speeches, aiming to reassure his base and reassert his authority. But the speeches came across as hollow, rehearsed, and disconnected from the reality on the ground. His tone, often more corporate than compassionate, did little to appease those who felt abandoned. The Labour leader's attempts to pivot the conversation back to his original policy proposals, such as tackling the climate crisis, reforming healthcare, and strengthening workers' rights, seemed increasingly irrelevant in the face of the growing scandal within his own party. The public, already fatigued by years of political upheaval, was no longer interested in his vision for the future. They wanted answers to the questions that had been left hanging in the air. Why were so many Labour MPs defecting? What had gone wrong with the party's leadership? And most crucially, who would take responsibility for the chaos? The defection of MPs to Reform UK was just the beginning. Within days, even more high-profile figures, including former cabinet members and rising stars within Labour, began openly questioning Starmer's leadership. In private conversations, several MPs expressed doubts about Starmer's ability to unify the party or inspire the electorate. One prominent MP, who had been a close ally of Starmer in the past, was quoted as saying, "It's clear that the leadership is not just out of touch, it's fundamentally broken. We need someone who can bring Labour back to its roots, someone who can fight for the people again." These words, spoken behind closed doors, were becoming more and more common, and it was only a matter of time before they would spill into the public domain. Simultaneously, the rise of Reform UK continued to gain momentum. With each defection, Reform's ranks swelled, and the party's platform gained a new level of credibility. Their message resonated with a growing number of voters who had become disillusioned with the establishment politics of both Labour and the Conservatives. Reform UK, once a fringe party, now found itself in a position to challenge the status quo in ways that no one had predicted. Richard Tice, the leader of Reform UK, capitalised on the disarray within Labour, presenting his party as the real alternative to the traditional political system. Tice's speeches, which had once been considered radical or extreme, now felt prescient as he promised a clear break from the old guard. His call for stricter immigration controls, tougher penalties for crime, and a renewed focus on national sovereignty found an eager audience among working-class voters who felt abandoned by Labour's left-wing policies. The political vacuum left by Starmer's failure was also being filled by rising figures within the Labour Party itself. Ambitious MPs began positioning themselves for a leadership bid, with many hinting at their willingness to challenge Starmer's authority. In private conversations, names like Yvette Cooper, Rachel Reeves, and Lisa Nandy emerged as potential challengers, all of whom had their own visions for the future of the party. However, none of these figures had the necessary support to mount a successful challenge, at least not yet. Starmer's position, though increasingly fragile, was still bolstered by a core group of loyalists who were determined to hold on to power. But as defections continued, even those loyalists began to question whether Starmer could realistically lead Labour into the next election. The rise of Reform UK presented a new political dynamic, one that Starmer had not anticipated. It wasn't just a matter of losing MPs to a rival party. It was the crystallisation of a new political movement that threatened to overtake Labour as the dominant force on the right of British politics. Reform UK's ability to present itself as a genuine challenger to the political establishment had the potential to fracture not only Labour, but also the Conservative Party. With a large swath of the electorate now leaning towards Reform UK, the cool stage was set for a dramatic shift in the political landscape. In the midst of this chaos, Starmer's handling of the grooming gang controversy became a flashpoint. The accusations levelled against Labour for not adequately addressing the issue of grooming gangs had been simmering for years, but now they were front and centre. As former Labour MPs defected to Reform UK, many of them cited the party's failure to confront the grooming gang issue as a primary reason for their departure. In a particularly explosive interview, former Labour MP Naz Shah, who had previously been a vocal advocate for addressing issues facing Muslim communities, criticised Starmer's leadership for avoiding the topic. Shah's comments were widely reported, and they struck a nerve with many voters who felt that Labour had been complicit in ignoring the issue for far too long. The controversy surrounding grooming gangs was not just a political issue, it was a moral one. For many voters, it represented a failure of leadership to protect vulnerable children and families. The fact that Starmer and other senior Labour figures had been accused of failing to take a strong stance on the issue only added to the growing sense that the party was out of touch with the concerns of ordinary people. As the defection of MPs continued, Starmer found himself on the defensive, forced to answer questions about Labour's past mistakes and its failure to address the real concerns of its base. Labour's internal crisis was now undeniable, and the clock was ticking. The possibility of a general election loomed larger with each passing day as the political landscape shifted beneath Starmer's feet. Would Labour be able to regroup and salvage its credibility? Or was this the beginning of the end for the party as a serious contender in British politics? The answers would soon become clear, but for now the only certainty was that Keir Starmer's political future was on the line. As the political drama unfolds and the future of the Labour Party hangs in the balance, the question remains: what will happen next? Will Keir Starmer manage to salvage his leadership, or will the rise of Reform UK push the country into uncharted political waters? The stage is set for a political showdown that could change the course of British history. But we want to hear from you. What do you think will happen in the wake of these shocking defections? Will Starmer bounce back, or is the Labour Party heading for irrelevance? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe for more updates as we continue to track this unfolding political saga. Stay tuned as we bring you the latest developments on this story. The political landscape is shifting, and you won't want to miss a moment.